There's a variety of different arrangements in place on the Australian domestic arrangements. So some of the international crew will align with some of the Australian international crew, but the domestic crew have different agreements and different time limitations in how they work in Australia.
So, the international crew obviously overnight at the end of the destination and then go back on a subsequent flight.
Yes.
Okay.
So they'll overnight in Melbourne or Sydney, and then they may work another international sector. They stay on the international network, and then they'll eventually wind up back in Bangkok or Singapore.
Do you know if your competitors follow the same practice?
Well, all our competitors operating out of Singapore and Kuala Lumpur and Bali and Jakarta, and the service and Vietnam are definitely operating on the same basis.
So they're the other international carriers that come into Australia.
Yeah, I don't think there's any other Australian carriers with hubs in Darwin or doing as big a presence in Asia as what we have, and therefore they're focused much more.
The other one would be Virgin. I'm not sure about Tiger.
They closed their Darwin operations down.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I've been forwarded a copy of what purports to be a terms of engagement for Singapore-based staff. It's a fairly low salary level compared to Australian salary, so it must be advantageous for Jetstar to use those staff on the domestic league.
I think the stat that we said last time, which is the most important thing. I think there's a lot of movement of staff around the network, but since we started in 2004, Jetstar had 100% of its business in the domestic network, and 100% of our staff were Australian. Now we have 2/3 of our business, so 66% of our business is outside the Australian domestic market, and we still employ 2/3 of the staff that are inside Australia. So I think you can see Jetstar versus a lot of our competitors in Asia, we're still employing and creating a lot more jobs in Australia, even though a lot of our growth is in Asia. Now, as we grow in Asia, we're absolutely recruiting people in Singapore and Bangkok and Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi and all those bases where we're building up a strong presence in those markets. And a lot of the growth, I mean, you hear a lot of talk about the fringe of, a Perth Singapore or a Darwin Singapore, but a lot of the growth in Asia is for flying in Asia. We've started 7 destinations now in China, 4 in mainland China in the last 12 months. We fly domestically in Vietnam. We fly Singapore to Japan. We fly a lot of different network structures now, and we've had compound growth in Singapore of 50% and 40% over the last 2 years, respectively. And that's given us a huge amount of growth in that marketplace. And we have recruited a lot more people in Singapore to fund the flying in that marketplace. But our cost structure in those markets and employment agreement in those markets are merely competitive with the other operators in those markets.
So that's the sort of salary levels and conditions of employment are comparable with the other operators in the same market?
That's correct. That's correct. And I think we provided with some questions, some of the questions I noticed, some of the salary levels in Singapore and Australia.
Which question was that? I missed that one. Which?
I can dig it. I'll find the appropriate answer. From Senator Milne, question 3 that we provided back on notice. Indicative salary range for a Singapore-based crew member would be in the order of $36,000 to $46,000, and indicative salary for an Australian-based cabin crew would be in the order of $50,000 Australian dollars to $69,000 Australian dollars.
So what's that a labour disadvantage of 2 to 1 or something?
Sorry? a labour disadvantage.
Well, I'm just wondering what, as I say, I wouldn't bloody hell, I don't know how they do it internationally, but at the year 2000, for instance, one of the reasons America's technically insolvent is they had a 25-to-1 labour disadvantage against China, and why they couldn't compete. So what's the worst labour disadvantage you work with?
I wouldn't know that off the top of my head, but I mean, at the end of the day, you've got to be competitive in each of the local markets to recruit cabin crew and pilots. And pilots tend to be more of an international market than the cabin crew. And the salary levels are commensurate with the local market levels. I mean, you can't grow by the amount we're growing by without having attractive competitive salaries to attract the right people into the business. And that's what we base our business on.
Yeah, it's thanks for drawing my attention to that. The agreement I've seen has raw numbers which I haven't been able to work up to take into account other things which, obviously the basis will not insignificantly lower than those figures. But that's typical, is it? I mean, that's the sort of average, not an atypical.
Yeah, the Bangkok salaries are very similar to the Singapore salaries. The salaries inside Vietnam are substantially less, as you can imagine, for domestic flying inside Vietnam. But they're all commensurate with local market levels.
Okay. And is there any special dispensation required for the international crew to operate on the domestic tag leg?
I'm unaware of any special dispensation.
Okay. Just for completeness, thought I would ask that question.
You want to go to stick shape?
Yeah, that's probably given the time.
I think Senator Xenophone's got a few more questions. So
at the end, I'll wait.
I'd be keen to have you ask stick shape because obviously it's something that we need to get our heads around.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to talk about stick shakers on the record or off the record?
We're comfortable. So we're comfortable with what would you prefer?
No, I'm happy. We always prefer on the record, okay. Mr. Joyce, but I'm conscious that there may, at some stage, you might be asking us that, so I thought I'd start with that question.
Well, if we get into some territory that we think is appropriate to go off the record, I think we can go there.
Okay, well, Captain Davey, perhaps you could give us the benefit of your views about stick shaker incidents that have been experienced in your Q400 fleet.
Can I open up and then just get Mark to come in then on it, Senator? I think for us, obviously, we've been very focused in on the stick shaker issue that's occurred on the Qantas Link fleet. What Mark will go through is that there are a number of different categories of stick shakers that you can classify them into. The ones that would have the safety concern are the low velocity, low energy stick shaker events, which we over the last, since 2008, have had 4 of them. We had 3 of them in a batch in 2008 and then 1 of them a year later. They're the ones that are really the focus of, and we're happy to go through the other ones and why they're not a concern. Yes, again, that wasn't a low energy. It wasn't a low energy stick shaker issue. That falls into one of the other categories. We've got environmental. We've got these VREF issues that occur, and we're happy to explain them. But we think the focus should be on the low energy ones where the issue's been.
Mr. Joyce, I fly on the Q400s regularly, so I'm very interested in whatever you can tell me about them.
Yes. So then it's to say that the stick shaker, there are a lot of protections, and what we're talking about are the protections that are in place before you get to a stall issue with the aircraft. And in all of these cases, what we've seen is that we haven't penetrated all of the protections, and what we've seen is that the recovery has been good for the Qantas Link pilots and how they recovered the situation. Now, what I might do is get Mark to take you through what are the different levels of protection that takes place, then talk about these low-energy stick shaker events and talk about the activities that we've put in place since we identified the first one and how we're working through these issues to try and eliminate the events completely. Mark?
In relation to the defences that Alan was just mentioning, there's six levels of defence that an error has to actually penetrate through prior to the aircraft stalling. And those 6 levels of defence are company policy and procedures that guard against low-speed events. So we have policy and procedures in place, and basically crew coordination procedures, where pilots alert each other of the aircraft speed should it be getting below certain parameters. We have initial and recurrent training programs that provide skills to pilots to avoid low-speed events. We have stick shaker devices in the aircraft that actually, the stick shaker actually vibrates when the aircraft reaches a predetermined speed or angle of attack prior to the stall. We have documented stick shaker recovery procedures that pilots are trained to conduct. There are stick pusher devices in the aircraft that activate just prior to the stall to lower the aircraft's angle of attack, and we actually have stick pusher recovery procedures that pilots are trained to we train pilots to conduct. In relation to the actual events, we've had environmental events. Environmental events are events where a momentary stick shaker happens, and it's usually due to turbulence or wind shear, and the event comes and goes before the pilot can really take any action. It's usually less than 1 second, and it's usually caused by a momentary displacement of the what we call the alpha vanes. They're vanes on the front of the aircraft that measure the aircraft's angle of attack. So if the aeroplane experiences moderate to severe turbulence, the alpha vane may be displaced and you may get a momentary stick shaker. The other category of stick shakers that we've experienced are stick shakers as a result of what we call the increased reference speed switch being inadvertently left on when it should have been turned.
Language that
Sure.
I'll understand when I read the Hansard.
Sure. It gets a little bit complicated, but when an aircraft is flying in icing conditions and it accumulates ice on the wings, the speed at which the aeroplane will stall increases. And in fact, if it has no protection, the stall could actually occur before the stick shaker or the stick pusher activates. So in the Dash 8 aircraft, we have a system where we actually bias the stick shaker and stick pusher speeds. That is, we actually increase them, so we bias them up by, in the Q400 aircraft, 20 knots, and in the Q300 aircraft, 10 knots. So they will actually, when the aeroplane is in icing conditions, that those systems will, and there is ice on the wings, and as a result the stall speed has increased, those systems will activate before the aircraft stalls. The events that we've had have not been in icing conditions. They've been events where the aircraft has been in icing conditions, has exited icing conditions, so it's in clear air, and there has been no ice on the aircraft, but the pilots have forgotten to switch off the increased reference speed switch, and the stick shake is activated. So, but it's important to understand that in these events, the actual aircraft speed has been nowhere near the stalling speed of the aeroplane. That's because the system has been biased upwards and there has been no ice on the aircraft.
So is there a complete difference in mode and training requirements in that area between a Dash 8 and a 400?
300 and 400.
Sorry.
They both have, a 3 and a 400 both have the same system, yes.
They're all identical.